just 10 minutes to get you up to speed on world events. I'm Carl Azus for CNN 10, and we're starting with a question that governments, security experts, and military officials are asking worldwide. What are the remaining members of the ISIS terrorist group going to do after a series of defeats in the region they wanted to be their own country? Earlier this year, they lost control of Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq. Earlier this month, they lost control of Raqqa, the city in Syria they'd called their capital. They've been defeated and pushed out of other parts of the region. They've lost control of territory. The U.S. military estimates that tens of thousands of ISIS terrorists have been killed. So where will the survivors go? Will they try to regroup in another part of the Middle East or beyond? Experts say they may hide among those who sympathize with them, but that they won't have a geographical command center to plan attacks from. Will ISIS try to launch terrorist attacks in other parts of the world? Experts say that's still a threat, as ISIS and terrorists inspired by the group may still try to target civilians. Will ISIS lay low for a while and then try to make a comeback in the years to come? Experts say that's also possible, though world leaders are likely to be more on guard against ISIS in the future. One thing that's certain is that the battle-ravaged cities that ISIS has left behind have a long, difficult road ahead if they're to recover.
This may be where ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is hiding, but probably wishes he wasn't. Russian and Syrian regime airstrikes pound ISIS's remnants in the city of Deir ez-Zor, but they aren't alone in the skies or on the ground here. Banking hard and keeping out of the Russians' way are US jets, assisting these US-backed Kurdish fighters to take the nearby countryside from ISIS just the day before. ISIS are collapsing and leaving in their wake an almost Cold War standoff.
Well, ISIS may be holding out in a pocket of the town of Deir ez-Zor behind me over there, surrounded by the Syrian regime, but they've been kicked out too of this area by American-backed Kurdish SDF forces. Now, they've advanced to this river here, which puts them literally meters away from the Syrian regime, who are backed by Russian air power. We're told, in fact, these Kurdish American-backed forces have held face-to-face meetings with Russian military officials to be sure they don't clash around here. Now, in the end game against ISIS, Moscow and Washington's forces literally meters away from each other.
5 years in, and Syria is ground to dust. And this is what they're still fighting over. It's unclear who is left inside Deir ez-Zor, but those who fled, estimated recently at 10,000 a day, dot the skyline. They tried to filter them, but last week a suicide bomber struck, and yesterday they found 30 ISIS fighters. They're followed around by the horror of what they fled, but also by suspicion. The simple question: are the last to flee the most loyal to ISIS, or just the least fortunate? We saw everything in my village, she says. Airstrikes, children and elderly dying. My relative just last week. The children couldn't stop crying from fear. I could only stand there. What could I do? I don't know if our home is still standing, or even who's bombing us. Yusuf is 10 and doesn't have any superhero powers here. Just dust and bad dreams. When I'd hear the shelling, he says, I'd hide in the ground. The hardest part about living in the desert is I'm not at home. The stream is endless, like the bombing they flee, and this war, which keeps finding new chapters and adversaries around them.
Now we're explaining a $5 million effort to save what's believed to be the most endangered marine mammal in the world. And this is that animal. It's called a vaquita porpoise. Scientists estimate that there are fewer than 30 of these animals left in the wild. So Vaquita CPR, which stands for Conservation, Protection, and Recovery, is using this sea pen to try to capture the porpoises and then move them to captivity. They're getting help from the U.S. Navy, which is loaning 4 bottlenose dolphins to the rescue effort. If all goes according to plan, the dolphins will attempt to help find and shepherd the vaquitas into the sea pens. This has never been done before, and it's not easy because the vaquitas are shy. They tend to avoid boats and people. Vaquita CPR has captured a vaquita in this operation, which began over a week ago, but the animal had to be released because researchers thought it was too stressed to stay in the pen. Vaquita CPR plans to continue this operation for another couple weeks in the hopes of capturing the animals, breeding them in captivity, and eventually releasing them back into the wild. 10-second trivia. Which inventor became famous for his work on an induction coil that's still used in TVs and electronics? Charles Babbage, Garrett Morgan, Nikola Tesla, or Alessandro Volta? The Tesla coil, which can create high voltage at a low current, was invented by Nikola Tesla in 1891. The induction motor, machines that use alternating current. Tesla has a lot of credits to his name, not counting the car company named after him. So does Lonnie Johnson. He's been working on an engine that converts heat into electricity. But especially if you're under 50 years old, you're familiar with another invention of his. You've probably been drenched by it.
There's this amazing picture of my coworker. It's him reading a Ninja Turtles book, lying next to a Super Soaker. When the Super Soaker came out, it was a game changer. The slogan, "Wetter is better," was essentially a mantra for kids during summer break. So when I went to Atlanta to interview the guy responsible for all that, I had to show him the photo.
That's funny.
Lonnie Johnson invented the Super Soaker back in 1982. But that is not his only invention.
Well, I have over 100 patents.
Everything from the Nerf gun to a thermoelectric energy converter. He also worked on NASA's Galileo mission to Jupiter and alongside the US military.
The first Super Soaker actually I made in my shop in my basement in the evenings when I would come home from work. And at the time I was actually working on the stealth bomber program back when it was highly classified. And I actually couldn't even tell my wife what I was working on during the daytime. It was that top secret.
The original name for the Super Soaker was the Drencher.
We ran into a challenge regarding the name because another inventor claimed it. So we changed the name to Super Soaker just to avoid having to deal with that.
Super Soaker is definitely a way better name. When he started, Lonnie wasn't trying to create a toy for kids.
I was working on a new type of heat pump that would use water as a working fluid instead of Freon. And I was experimenting with some nozzles that I machined. And I shot a stream of water across the bathroom, and I thought, geez, maybe I should put this hard science stuff aside and work on something fun like a water gun. It still works.
And this brings me back to a previous point. Lonnie Johnson is a super genius scientist. This is his lab. And this is what he's working on now.
Yeah, right now I'm working on advanced battery technology. My goal is to develop a battery that will store about 3 times the energy of a lithium-ion battery.
In comparison, the Super Soaker might not seem as hard science, but it was still a really, really important invention.
There are purses that retail for $15. There are purses that retail for $15,000. And then there's the Mawawad 1001 Nights Diamond Purse. Now, if you're thinking diamonds are expensive, think about the fact that this handbag has more than 4,500 of them and is made out of 18-karat gold. It holds the Guinness World Record for being the most valuable handbag. Its price, $3.8 million. Which would likely leave you very little to put into the purse. Now, even if you tote around that kind of money and you don't clutch it too tightly and you consider it convertible to a handbag, would you care to carry all those carats to the park? I mean, don't get mad at the messenger here, but at Satchel High Price, security is not in the bag. You'd probably want to stuffle it in the closet and wall it off to keep it safe. I'm Carl Azuz, and that's CNN 10.